Hello, my name is Michael Eldridge. I model in S scale in the late 1920s. This whole project started out with an interest in 3D image capture and specifically to capture human figures so that I could print them. Things didn't go exactly according to that plan. What you will see here is a sort of a voyage of discovery. You might ask, why bother printing 3D human figures? You can just go to Amazon and get 40 of them for $15. Well, perhaps you model in a minority scale like S scale and the figures aren't available except at fairly high prices. Maybe you model in a minority era. If you get outside of the steam to diesel transition era or modern era, things can be pretty hard to find. Maybe you want to make a specific figure of an actual person, or just a figure that you can't find otherwise. Or maybe you just got a new 3D printer and you're wondering what to do with it, and this seems like a good project. Well, I started out trying to do 3D scans, and I looked for products that I wasn't going to have to spend a lot of money to try out. It turns out there are two basic approaches to 3D scanning. One is called LiDAR, which is light detection and ranging. LiDAR is built into iPhones, I think after the iPhone 12. It's also in some fairly new Android devices. LiDAR basically just figures out how far you are away from the subject you're scanning, which makes it a little easier for the software to stitch the images together. Whether or not your camera uses LiDAR, the main process is called photogrammetry. This is just taking lots and lots of photographs of the object and then sending it through some very sophisticated software that stitches them together into a 3D image. I tried the 4 products listed on the slide because they were free and they ran on my devices. Some of them I really didn't get a usable result at all, but the Curie engine on Android phone generated this image. This is not using LiDAR. It looks worse on the screen than it does when you end up printing it, but still these were not great. I think LiDAR should be considered a requirement. The clear winner from the products I tried was Polycam, which I ran on an iPad. Polycam uses LiDAR, so you need a newer phone or iPad. Now you can get scanners for about $300, which would probably do an even better job. I didn't try one of these because I didn't want to invest that much money. I scanned my wife. You can see how happy she was about the whole process. With most of these products, you upload all the photographs and it processes them on a heavy-duty computer, and then you download usually an OBJ file at the end. There is typically a fee when you download the OBJ file, which is how they give you the software for free. The scans are put together into a figure that has no volume at all. It's just a surface, so you cannot print from the OBJ file that you get. We need to process the file. There are several tools that can do this. Probably the most popular is Mesh Mixer, which I used before. Autodesk stopped supporting Mac, and I got bizarre results with the latest version on Windows. But I found out that it's actually a lot easier in Fusion 360, which I use for all my CAD drawings. You can get Fusion 360 for free as long as you don't make a significant amount of money using it. So the process is that you load in your OBJ file from Polycam using the insert mesh command. It comes in like this, and like I said, this is hollow, so you can't print from this. So what we need to do first is close up the object, which is done simply by doing a repair to close holes. You don't need these other ones, and they tend to do too much and kind of cause problems. When you close holes on that figure, it's going to put a bottom on it, but it is still hollow inside. So the next step is to convert the mesh. You can do it with parametric or base feature. Parametric is faster, but it still takes a little while to create the solid object. You can see the little warning that it's more than 10,000 triangles. It's more like 100,000 triangles, and so it takes a little while. There she is, now a solid object that you can export and print with your 3D printer. My second approach was to create a figure from scratch. There are two products, Blender and ZBrush, which do the same thing. I found Blender a little easier to work with. There are lots of tutorials on how to use Blender. These are two that I found the most helpful. The first one is always called the donut tutorial, and he shows you how to use Blender to make that donut image. It's a couple of hours to work your way through the tutorials. The second tutorial is specifically about making a human figure. Both of these work in a paradigm of modeling with clay. So basically you start with a shape like a sphere and you start pulling clay out or pushing it in or carving it with different tools. This was my attempt after working through the tutorial. Can you tell which one was mine? I felt like this was adequate. I mean, it sort of looks like a person, and maybe if it was scaled down and 3D printed it would be okay, but I wasn't really satisfied with the result. One thing I did learn was how to create hair for figures in Blender. It is the same process for making clothing in Blender, which we will use later. My third approach was to use a product called Daz 3D. Again, this is a free program, but if you use it, you're going to end up buying clothes and hair and some other things, which can be a bit pricey. Daz 3D is a very powerful program with many features and capabilities. It is used mostly to create scenes and simple animations like you would see in video games. But we can use it to create 3D prints of human beings. The interface is intimidating, but you will end up using only about 10 to 12 commands. So basically, we start by bringing in a figure. This is one that is included free with the product. First, we're going to put some clothes on this guy. When you buy sets of clothing, there are lots of things in the set. So first we're going to give him some pants. You just drag them in and they appear on the guy, so you don't really have to be an artist for this. We'll give him a pair of shoes and a shirt and a vest. We are going to have to put some hair on him, and this is another thing that comes with the product. Almost everything that you do with a figure can be edited. For an example, we're going to take his hair and move his hairline up a little bit. You select his hair, and then you can see on the bottom right menus that there's a selection called Actor where we can change all kinds of features of the hair. We are going to make his forehead go up. So you just adjust these sliders. There are lots of things that you can adjust. The level of detail is kind of crazy. I just wanted to show you this. You would never do this for our models, but this is how detailed this product is. We're going to select his eye, and then we're going to move his eye left and right. This guy looks a little too athletic, so we're going to fatten him up to make him a more normal guy. We just find the pudgy factor here and crank it up. We are going to want to move his joints around so we can put him in different poses. This is very simple. You basically select a part that you want to move, and then you use these adjusters to move the part around. We're going to bend his arm in and then bend his forearm up and then rotate his hand a little bit. We just select his hand and then change the grip so that he's holding a shovel or something. His right arm looks really awkward, so we are going to bring that down and change the grip for a little more natural drape to his hand. Now we need to get him into a slicing program. This is very easy. We just export him as an OBJ. This screen looks complicated, but we just have to select OBJ file format. The size isn't really all that important. I changed the vertical to Y so that it looks right when you import it into the slicer. So I use Chitubox for the slicer. And we just import the OBJ file. We're going to stand him up, and then we're going to resize him to our scale. So you can make him any size that you want. I ended up making him a little larger than O scale. He's 15 millimeters tall. And you can see how the hands are printable. The hair looks a little wild, but when it prints, it doesn't look so weird. There are lots of outfits and clothing and hair and so on available to put on these figures, but they get kind of expensive, so I wondered if you could make clothing for them. I looked up some videos on how to do that, and basically there's a process that we run in Blender to make clothing. There's a plugin called the Daz to Blender Bridge. In Daz, you export through the bridge, and then you can import the person in Blender. So this is Blender again, and it's very easy to import the figure. It knows what you just exported. I'm not going to explain all the steps here. It's really quite involved. There are a lot of steps, but you can get a sort of list, checklist, and just follow it and get through the process. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to grab a region of this person with a select tool. So we're selecting the part that will end up being this guy's shirt. I'm just doing this really roughly. If you were going to do this for real, you would go back and edit this shape so that it was a little more even or smooth or something like that. So we create a copy of the part and then we name it shirt. Now we're going to shrink wrap the shirt onto the figure, which we do with a modifier. That is the basic way that Blender works with separate objects. So we just click on the object and then we apply the modifier shrink wrap and tell it to shrink it onto this figure. And then the shirt has no depth at all. It's just a shell and we need it to be 3D. So we add another modifier called solidify to the shirt. We have to save the shirt as an OBJ file. So we're just going to name it shirt. And then go back to DAZ Studio and bring in the shirt that we just made in Blender. When you first bring in the shirt, it is not really attached to the figure. If you move the figure, he'll just move right out of this shirt. There's one more step to make it move with the figure. You have to look through a long list of what it's supposed to remain attached to. The shirt is part of wardrobe, and so we scroll down and we find there's a wardrobe shirt and we apply that. So from now on, if we move the figure, the shirt moves with him. You can do anything you want with that shirt when it is in Blender. You can put details on it, like buttons or bows, lapels, whatever. It's possible to make clothing, but it's a long process and it requires some artistic ability. But I think it's doable. I can do it, so we know that it doesn't require much artistic ability. I tried 3 ways of making human figures for 3D printing. First, I tried 3D capture software, where I thought Polycam was definitely the best for me. The figures are fairly realistic and they can represent a real person. You could also capture a real person's face and attach it to a body made with DAZ to make a pretty realistic representation of a person that you know. The second attempt to make human figures was with Blender, but that was beyond my artistic skill, and it's a long process just to make one figure. Finally, I think the practical solution is to use DAZ Studio. The interface is a bit complicated, but you end up using only about 20 different commands total. And so it's very manageable, very learnable. You can draw clothing in Blender, but it will probably be much easier and less time consuming to buy a few outfits. A lot of these outfits have many components, different pants and shirts and things, and you can mix and match. You can take the pants from one and the shirt from the other. If you buy 3 or 4 outfits, you can make several different combinations. And keep in mind that you are painting the figures, so a brown suit coat on one figure can be a blue suit coat on another figure. You can adjust a lot of things, like whether it's buttoned or open and so on, so you don't have to buy a lot of outfits. Once you figure out DAZ Studio, you can make a lot of figures and print as many as you want for about a penny a piece. So that's now my way that I'm going to be making human figures.